To my channel. My name is Haley, and in my last video I shared the literary life of 2024, my reading plans for the year. I chose a male author of the year, a female author of the year, a poet of the year, and one reading challenge to complete. And in today's video I am sharing more about that reading challenge and my picks for the reading challenge. So the reading challenge I chose to complete in 2024 is the Literary Life Podcast Books of Centuries Reading Challenge. This is so fun for someone who just has not read the classics. I just haven't. What did they teach me in school? I don't know, but they definitely didn't teach classic books, and this is the reading challenge for you if for a long time you've been wanting to do just that. So in the Books of Centuries Reading Challenge, you are essentially reading across time, from the mythology, the ancient age, biblical times, all the way up to the 21st century. You're picking one or two books from that time period and reading through the ages. And this is incredibly fun. Number one, look at this beautiful printable that they included for the reading challenge. I'm really grateful for that. They also included another printable where you can actually write down all of your choices and check them off as you go. So I printed that off. But the most important thing and wonderful thing that they did, if you are dumb like me and just don't know all of the classics throughout the ages, is include a reading list, a very, very thorough, comprehensive reading list for each time period, each age, each century. They've given plenty of examples to choose from. You have likely heard of some of these titles before, so they just really did their research to help you through this journey. And I'm very excited to share my picks with you all. I've already read a few of these this year. We're in February now, and I've already read a few. I'm super proud of myself, and I hope that you all join along with me. And if you have, please share your book choices with me in the comments below. But let's get started. So the first age or century in the Books of Centuries Reading Challenge is mythology, and that is a tale or collection of mythology, including but not limited to Greek, Roman, Egyptian, Norse, Native American, African, or Asian. And for this, I chose a children's book. I think if you're just starting out with classics, children's classics are a great place to start. And I chose the Delaire's Book of Greek Myths. This is a beloved childhood classic by many. And if we choose to do myths in our homeschool, which I'll be honest, I'm a little conflicted about myths and pagan myths. However, do I think that this is going to compete with my belief about Jesus Christ? No, I don't. And I listened to a podcast that the Literary Life Podcast did about why we read pagan myths as Christians and people who just love literature. And I was actually convinced by them to read myths myself. I don't think my children, my oldest is 5, she'll be 6 this fall. I don't think she's at the age where I'm ready to introduce this yet. We haven't even started formal homeschooling yet. But I did want to get a children's version in case we do that in the future, and just because I'm a little bit intimidated by classics. And so some of the classics I chose are children's versions, and that's okay. If that's where you're at, if you're just starting out, no, it's okay if you pick a children's book. I've read a few of these. They're short, the illustrations are beautiful and fun, and I think it's a great introduction into Greek mythology. So that's what I chose for the mythology age, for the Books of Centuries. The next age in the Books of Centuries is the Ancients. So a work written during or about ancient times can include Greek drama, Homeric epics, books on ancient languages, historical books, etc. And for the Ancients, the Odyssey by Homer. Number one, because this is a book I read a little bit of. I took AP Literature and AP Language in high school. I'm not sure. It may have actually been an English or a literature class in college that I read a part of this from. I'm not sure, but I've had the full book in my library for several years now, and I haven't read the whole thing. But I want to. This is a classic, and I've been really into poetry, reading it and writing it, and I really want to read an epic poem Homer is a classic. You've always heard about the Odyssey and the Iliad if you know anything about it. And I think that going from the D'Ailaire's Greek myths and getting a little bit of background and then diving into the Odyssey is going to be a perfect way to introduce myself to something like this. And I think I'm going to save this one for the summertime. I don't know if it's the waves on the cover or something about Greek myths that feels summery to me, but it does. So I'm going to read the Odyssey by Homer, hopefully this summer. The very next age or century on the Books of Centuries challenge is biblical times. This one's incredibly easy. A book from the Bible, a Bible story, or any book about biblical times. I am currently doing a reading challenge, The Bible in 90 Days. I am listening to that on my Holy Bible app. The narrator is wonderful. And if you don't think it counts to listen to the Bible, let me tell you, if you've ever struggled with the Old Testament, have someone narrate it to you and read it aloud to you. I have retained so much more of the Old Testament by listening to the Bible on audio than I ever have before. I've been able to get through some of those really hard books like Numbers and Deuteronomy by just using an audiobook to help walk me through it. It does count. It does still sit with you in your spirit, and it's still sanctifying and edifying to hear it on audio. I do still also read one chapter of my Bible each morning from the New Testament, but if you've had a hard time with the Old Testament or maybe the prophets specifically like I have, try the audio Bible. I am getting close to day 50 on the challenge, and it's made a world of difference. So that's what I'm choosing for biblical times, the Bible. What greater book is there? If I read no other book this year, that is the most important one that I want to get to. The very next century or age is the early Middle Ages, and that is a work written about or during the period of history from the end of the ancient world through the 13th century. Examples include Beowulf, stories of King Arthur, etc. And for this age, I chose Tales of King Arthur by Henry Gilbert. This again is a children's edition of the story. I have a couple of children's books in these very cheap, very simple paperbacks. And I think King Arthur is a good one to start with children, because I think this is one I'm going to try to actually read aloud with my oldest daughter. We've just started diving into chapter books. Her attention span is really growing with books. Her interest is growing with books. So I think this is one that we can do together, or at least try. If she's not into it, I'll stop. But if she's into it, this is one on the reading challenge that we can tackle together. And this is a classic. I feel like all of the great hero and chivalry stories about kings and queens in medieval times, and I think this is medieval times. I don't really know. Like I said, what are they teaching in school these days? Anyway, come from the Tales of King Arthur. So I'm excited to actually read them and not just go off Disney's The Sword and the Stone. This is probably a lot better. So, Tales of King Arthur. Next century on the Books of Centuries challenge is the 14th century, and it says to choose 2 works set in or about the 14th century. Can include Dante, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, Chaucer, etc. And for this one, I'm really excited about my book pick because I'm currently reading at this moment The Medieval Mind of C.S. Lewis, and one of the chapters in the book is why C.S. Lewis loved Dante. So after reading that, I'm really inspired to read Dante myself, so it's no surprise that my choice for this prompt in the challenge is The Inferno by Dante. This is the first book. I'm sure there's a more academic word for that, but the first book in kind of a 3-part series of Dante's journey through the Inferno. I think the other 2 are Purgatorio and Paradiso. So this one is Dante going through hell, the realms of hell. But what I didn't know about Dante, which I have heard of this book, I didn't know that it was also an epic poem. No idea. So I actually found that I have a lot of epic poems on my list this year, and I'm really excited about that because I've been getting into poetry, and this is long form story poetry. So I'm excited to learn more about what that means and what that is and why that's a form, but also just to enjoy it. I don't really want to overanalyze this too much. I'm thinking about reading Jason Baxter, Dr. Jason Baxter, who wrote The Medieval Mind of C.S. Lewis, also wrote A Beginner's Guide to Dante. I'm considering reading that first and then diving into this, but I'm also just considering diving into it to just see how I like it and see how it speaks to me without any other outside voice. But I think I find if I'm having trouble with it, I'm going to go to A Beginner's Guide or something to help walk me through it. I've found that to be incredibly helpful now that I'm diving into classics, is if I'm having a hard time with one, maybe just going to listen to someone talk about the classic. The Literary Life podcast has tons of podcast episodes about classic books and walking you through them that have been so helpful to me. So I may just dive right into this and see how it speaks to me, or I may get a little help from a literary advisor, if you will. The next age or century is the 15th century. So 2 works set in or about the 15th century. Some examples are The Imitation of Christ, Every Man Plays, the that was wrong, books on the War of Roses. And for this century, I chose The Imitation of Christ by Thomas Kempis, and I am using this as a devotional in the mornings. So this book is split up into several books, and there's also a numbered section. They're very short, so they work perfect for devotionals. I'm not sure if that was this book's intention or if that's just the way that it happened, but I'm already a little ways through this. I'm reading just one section in the morning right after reading my chapter of the Bible for the day. And I love this. I have never been able to finish a devotional that I started. Mostly, not necessarily because they're bad, but because I feel like I'm looking for a little more spiritual meat, if you will. I feel like a lot of devotionals nowadays are spiritual milk, so they're really good when you're a brand new Christian. But maybe when you've gone on a few years down the road, you want something a little more substantial. And this is it. I will probably reread this as a devotional every year after this. That's why I love this book so much. It is so wise and just full of rich but concise knowledge to get you through the day. It's incredible. If you've never read The Imitation of Christ, and if you read nothing else on this book, besides the Bible, of course, this is book number 2 that I would share, and this book influenced a lot of great writers that we already know and love. It's been around since the 15th century and is still one of the best-selling books about religion apart from the Bible, like probably number 2. So, The Imitation of Christ by Thomas Kempis. If you haven't read it, please, please, please do. It will change your life. The next century is the 16th century. I'm really excited about this one, and that is 2 works concerning or written in the 16th century. This could include Shakespeare, Marlowe, Sidney Spencer, and also any writer of the Reformation period, such as Erasmus, Luther, or Thomas More. And for this challenge, I chose to read Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. I've already read it. I'm not getting the book because I actually have the complete works of William Shakespeare up here in these older editions. They're very precious to me, so I'm going to leave them on the shelf. But I read A Midsummer Night's Dream in them already this year, and I read that along with the Literary Life podcast, and I loved it. I'm so surprised that I loved it. I was scared to death to read Shakespeare. I don't really know why. I think it's just you're made to think that it's way more highbrow than what it actually is, but I enjoyed it. I kept a narration notebook while I read it. So after each scene, I would get my notebook out and narrate what happened, which is essentially just summarizing what happened. So if I read the scene and my husband said what happened in that scene, I would tell him, and that's a narration. But I did that to make sure I was getting the story, and then I would go listen to the corresponding Literary Life podcast episode for those scenes or acts, whichever it may be. And that was so much fun. This play was hilarious, so I can already check off that challenge for the books of centuries. It was hilarious, it was like enchanting, and it was fun. And I'm so glad it was the first Shakespeare play I picked back up as an adult, because now I want to dive more into Shakespeare. That was a comedy, so very light, very fun. If you've never read Shakespeare, I think that's a really good place to start. I'm not sure that a tragedy would be. I'm a little nervous for that. But now I want to read them all. So give Shakespeare a try, and if you're nervous, give Shakespeare a try with a literary guide. Like the Literary Life podcast. They have podcast episodes for A Midsummer Night's Dream, as well as a few other plays. I think they've done some for Othello and A Winter's Tale, possibly more, but that's a good place to start. So if you're intimidated, literary buddy or a literary mentor, someone who has read them and knows them, to help walk you through it. And you may be surprised by how much you love some of these classics. The next century is the 17th century, so any two works regarding the 17th century. Writers of this time include Webster, Johnson, Milton, and Bunyan in England, Blaise Pascal, Jean Racine, and Jean de La Fontaine in France, and Miguel de Cervantes in Spain. I'm really excited about this one because The Pilgrim's Progress was written in this century. I've never read it, but I just finished Little Women, reading it for the very first time at the beginning of the year, and The Pilgrim's Progress is mentioned so much in that book. That was such a formative book for the sisters' childhood going on into adulthood, and I can't wait to read it. I'm going to get an illustrated version. It's another one I think I'm going to try to read out loud with my daughter and see how she does. If she likes it and wants to listen, great. If she's still a little too young, that's okay. I'm still going to read it, but I'm very excited about it. And I'm also going to read Paradise Lost by John Milton. This is another epic poem. Did not know Paradise Lost was written in poetry form. Once again, what are they teaching in school these days? But I'm excited about this one for several reasons. Not only was this another book that was influential to C.S. Lewis, but if you love Little House on the Prairie, and you remember the episode where Mary goes to the blind school, and Adam tells her that John Milton was blind, and she kind of comes to this realization that even though you're blind, you can do great and wonderful things in this life. And she mentioned that he was one of her favorite authors, and I think that this was one of her favorite books. And when you hear a beloved character, whether it's from a book or a show, mention a book that they love, you want to read it. And so I want to read this, and I'm incredibly excited about it. I feel like I'm picking very ambitious, long books, but it's okay. I'm going to try. This is a challenge. If I don't complete everything, it's okay. I'm going to get to these books eventually, and this is just kind of picking me up and moving me forward to do just that. The next century is the 18th century, and so that is any two written works composed during or regarding the 18th century. Can include authors like Boswell, Swift, Burney, Radcliffe, or even books on the French or American revolutions. For the 18th century, I chose Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. I don't own this book yet. I will get it later in the year as a prize to myself by completing some of these others. But it's one I really don't know anything about. I've heard of it. I've heard of it multiple times, not sure where, not sure when, but I'm going to go into the book not knowing anything. I'm not going to look it up. I'm not going to study. Once again, if I start the book and have problems, then I will go look for a literary mentor. But I'm just going to see what happens. And I think that's a fun way to approach classics, is just dive in, see what happens. If it's hard or if you don't like it, you can either try to go find some help, or you can just put it down. And it's okay. You don't have to like all of the classics just because they're a classic. But that's the one I'm going to try to use for the 18th century. The next century is, of course, the 19th century. So pick two 19th century works from writers such as Austen, Dickens, Eliot, the Brontes, Twain, Hugo, Verne, Hardy. This is an incredibly wonderful century for books. It's got almost all of the great classics that you hear about and the authors. And if you watched my 2024 Literary Life plan, you learned that my female author of the year was Jane Austen. And I have several of her books up here. I'm trying to decide which one I'm going to start with. I think I'm going to either start with Mansfield Park or Northanger Abbey. The Literary Life podcast has some episodes for those two particular books, and I've been having so much fun reading and listening that I think I want to do that again. So I'm not sure which one I'll start with, but it'll definitely be one of the two. I also picked up Middlemarch by George Eliot, not knowing it was this long. And that's okay. I actually don't think I'm going to get to this one this year. I may put it back on the shelf for another year. Like I said, my female author of the year is Jane Austen, so I will definitely read at least 2 from the 19th century and hopefully all of her works this year. But I've heard so much about Middlemarch and George Eliot that I really want to read it. If I get to it this year, or if I'm just in the mood, I am going to pick it up and try it. But if I don't, that's okay. I will take my time and go through it at a later time. The next century on the Books of Centuries is the 20th century. So 2 works written during or about the 20th century. Read anything from Golden Age detective stories to literary criticism. And this one is very easy because my male author of the year is C.S. Lewis, who is of the 20th century. I've already read Mere Christianity, and I'm working my way through the Chronicles of Narnia. I just finished up The Magician's Nephew. I read it in the wrong order. I thought The Magician's Nephew was number 4 in publication order. It's actually number 6. But I don't think it affected the storyline at all, considering that The Magician's Nephew is sort of the creation story and the genesis of Narnia. But I'm loving C.S. Lewis. I'm loving the fiction. I'm loving his nonfiction. And the 20th century will be well more than checked off by the end of the year, because I probably won't read all of his works, but I will probably read over half of his works this year, and I'm super excited about it. The very last century on the Books of Centuries is, of course, the 21st century. This one is easy because I host a book club, so I'm constantly reading Christian fiction and nonfiction, at least one a month. So far, I have read The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. I've read Hard Is Not the Same Thing as Bad by Abby Halberstadt. I've read some Tamara Alexander historical fiction around the Civil War era. And I'm currently reading The Medieval Mind of C.S. Lewis. And very excited because Cindy Rollins of the Literary Life podcast, she is one of the hosts, just released a book called Beyond Mere Motherhood. And it's about this. It's about educating yourself as a mother and continuing to read and flourish in your education in different areas. And so I think that's one I'm going to pick up very soon. So the 21st century will be no problem for me to get through. Thank you all so much for joining me. I hope this was fun. If you are doing the Literary Life Podcast 2024 Reading Challenge, please share your picks with me in the comments below. Let me know if we have some of the same picks, or if you've read some of the books I plan to read for the year. Let me know your thoughts. That's very encouraging. I'm a little intimidated, but I think it's going to be so much fun. Until next time, happy reading!